How about a little lesson in architectural history? You know, some style can be exotic, even a little romantic. You know, I've always loved architecture and history. When you combine the two, you get architectural history, and I derive so much inspiration from seeing houses of different periods. Now, I'm in Natchez, Mississippi, which is a really interesting town. It's right on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River, and here you can see a range of architectural styles that go from the end of the 18th century all the way up until the mid-20th century. Now, right now, I'm on the property of Longwood. This house was built in the late 1850s. And earlier houses were much more classical, houses like Auburn, Monmouth, Devereux, and Dunleith, which looks like a big Greek temple. Now what's interesting to me is that many of these suburban villas were set on large tracts of land, and the landscapes were characterized as being very naturalistic, even picturesque and romantic. You see, the idea of having a natural pond like this would have been an ideal element in the landscape of this period. Also, the drive coming up would be very circuitous. You would wind around, and only at certain points would views of the house be allowed. You see, you didn't want to reveal the house until a certain moment. You wanted it to be a surprise. And because the house itself was, well, the sort of crown jewel on the property. Thomas Jefferson was a master at this, and it's the way he laid out the grounds at his estate, Monticello in Virginia. There, he framed views, and everywhere you looked, it was its own little painting, if you will. So just imagine driving up to this house along this driveway and just getting tiny glimpses of this house, this beautiful structure on the hill. And even today, in this park-like setting, it's in its winter clothes, but it's still quite beautiful and quite romantic. Now that we've moved a little closer, you can get a better view of this house, and you can see how much different it looks from those classical Greek Revival examples that I pointed out just a few moments ago. This house is very much in the Oriental style or the Moorish style, and the owner, Dr. Hallernutt, who built this house in the late 1850s, wanted something completely different, something that none of his neighbors had, and believe me, he got it. He hired Samuel Sloan, a well-known architect in Pennsylvania. Mr. Sloan was hired to create the largest octagonal house in America. You see, the octagon form was a shape that Thomas Jefferson himself was very intrigued by. You see it at Monticello, in fact. The center dome, if you go up in the dome room, it is an octagon. Where that example is simple and classic, this one is much more elaborate. Now here's what's interesting about this house. It was never finished. You see, the Civil War broke out, and all the craftsmen who were working on the project prior to the Civil War left and went back to Philadelphia. Now what's so interesting to me is that the final version of this house would have been stuccoed. This idea of taking a very ordinary material like brick, you would stucco it to make it look like a more refined material, such as cut stone. You can actually see an example of this stuccoed wall that's scored to look like stone on one side of the house. Even all that delicate wood detail around each of the openings would have been painted to look like stone. You see, the idea was that it would be much more monolithic if it was all sort of the same color. Now, if you think the exterior isn't finished, come on inside. I love this view looking up from the center, the rotunda of the building. Now down there is floor number 1. This is floor number 2. This is floor number 3 and floor number 4. And above this is floor number 5. And you see the light pours from windows up in this big cupola straight down into the rotunda. That's a lot of stairs. You see, the idea was to bring that natural light from way above right through this floor, through these thick pieces of glass, into what essentially is the 6th floor of the house, the basement. You see, this house was going to be 30,000 square feet. It's really quite colossal. You can only imagine what it might have looked like had they been able to finish it. If you've enjoyed this little moment of architectural history, make sure you subscribe to ehowhome.